They told me to stay quiet. They threatened my career, my reputation, my family. They said if I opened my mouth, I would lose everything. Today, 15 million people hear my voice every single week. But you need to understand what they took from me first. I wasn't some activist looking for a fight. I was a 34-year-old news producer with a mortgage and a daughter in middle school. I reported what happened to me through the proper channels, quietly, professionally, exactly how you're supposed to. And they destroyed me for it. Not just fired me, blacklisted me, planted stories about me, made me unemployable in the industry I'd given 15 years of my life to. They wanted to make an example out of me, to show every other woman what happens when you speak up. So how does a blacklisted, broke, single mother with no job and no prospects become the most influential voice in advocacy journalism? How does someone they erased from the industry end up on the cover of Time magazine? What happened between my lowest moment, crying on my bathroom floor, wondering if I'd ever work again, and the day I testified before Congress while my former bosses watched from the gallery? If this story is already gripping you, if you need to know how she turned their silence into her megaphone, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video for every woman who was told to stay quiet. They need to see this. I'm going to tell you this story the way it deserves to be told. Not rushed, not sanitized. The real journey from silence to unstoppable. My name is Vanessa Carter, and this is how I turned their weapon against me into my greatest power. Let me take you back to who I was before I learned what it costs to tell the truth. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, in a row house neighborhood where everybody sat on their stoops in summer and knew each other's business, whether you wanted them to or not. My father, Bernard Carter, worked at the Bethlehem steel plant until it closed, then reinvented himself as a truck driver, spending weeks on the road so his family could stay in one place. My mother, Dorothy, was an elementary school teacher who believed that words were the most powerful force in the universe. "Vanessa, you have a gift," she told me when I was maybe 10 years old, watching me devour newspapers while other kids watched cartoons. "You see stories where other people see nothing. That's going to take you somewhere." I believed her, every word. I was the kid who ran the school newspaper, who interviewed the lunch ladies and wrote exposés about the broken water fountains. I was the teenager who dreamed of being Barbara Walters or Diane Sawyer, who practiced speaking into a hairbrush in front of my bedroom mirror. By 22, I'd graduated from the University of Maryland with a journalism degree and an internship at a local news station that paid almost nothing but taught me everything. By 28, I was a producer at a network affiliate in Philadelphia. By 32, I'd been recruited to New York, to WNS, one of the largest news networks in the country. I had arrived. Everything my parents had sacrificed, everything I'd worked for, it was finally paying off. I was assigned to the morning show, working under an executive producer named Richard Mercer. He was a legend in the industry, 3 decades at the network, multiple Emmy Awards, connections that reached into every corner of media. Everyone wanted to work with Richard. Everyone said he was the path to the top. What everyone didn't say, or said only in whispers, in bathroom stalls, in coded language that protected the speaker, was what Richard Mercer did to women who worked for him. The first time it happened, I convinced myself I'd misunderstood. We were in his office, reviewing a segment I'd produced. He stood too close behind me, his hand resting on my lower back as he leaned over my shoulder to look at the screen. When I shifted away, he shifted with me. "You're tense," he said. "You need to relax. This industry is stressful. I can help with that." I laughed awkwardly and made an excuse to leave. Back at my desk, my hands were shaking, but I told myself it was nothing. He was just friendly, just old school, just from a different generation. The second time, he was more direct. We were alone in an edit bay, late at night, finishing a piece that was scheduled to air the next morning. He locked the door behind him, casually, like it was nothing, and came to stand beside me. "You know, Vanessa, I've been watching you. You're talented, really talented. I could make things happen for you, the kind of opportunities most producers wait years for." I appreciate that, Richard. I'm just focused on doing good work. Good work isn't enough in this business. You need someone in your corner, someone with influence. He reached out and touched my hair, tucking a strand behind my ear. I could be that person for you if you're willing to be flexible. I stood up so fast my chair rolled into the console behind me. I should go. I need to get home to my daughter. His expression flickered, annoyance, then something colder, something that looked like calculation. Of course, go home to your daughter. He unlocked the door and held it open for me, smiling pleasantly. We'll continue this conversation another time. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, questioning every interpretation. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just how things worked at this level. Maybe I was being naive. But I knew what I'd felt in that room, and I knew what he'd meant. The question was what I was going to do about it. For 3 weeks, I tried to handle it myself. I changed my schedule to avoid being alone with Richard. I made sure there were always other people in meetings. I kept my office door open, worked in common areas, invented reasons to leave early or arrive late, anything to minimize the moments when he could corner me. It didn't work. Richard Mercer hadn't become one of the most powerful men in network television by being easy to avoid. He controlled assignments, schedules, access. If he wanted to find you alone, he found you alone. The comments became more frequent, more explicit, more impossible to misinterpret. That blouse looks good on you. It would look better on my office floor. Your daughter's in 7th grade, right? Private school isn't cheap. I could help with that if you helped me. You're not playing the game, Vanessa. Everyone plays the game. Don't be naive. Each comment was delivered casually, with a smile, in tones that could be explained away if anyone overheard. He was a master at maintaining deniability while making his meaning absolutely clear. I started losing weight. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. My daughter, Maya, 13 years old and perceptive beyond her years, noticed immediately. Mom, what's wrong? You seem sad all the time now. Nothing's wrong, baby. Just work stress. You used to love your job. Now you come home and sit in the dark. I held her close, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, and felt something harden in my chest. I was not going to let this man destroy me. I was not going to teach my daughter that powerful men could do whatever they wanted without consequences. I was going to fight back. The first person I told was my colleague, Dana Morrison. Dana was a senior producer who'd been at the network for over a decade. She was smart, respected, connected, the kind of woman I hoped to become. We'd developed a friendship over late nights in the edit bay and shared frustrations with network politics. I asked her to meet me for coffee at a place far from the office. When I told her what had been happening, her face went pale. Richard Mercer, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. You know. Everyone knows, Vanessa. Everyone who's been here long enough. She stirred her coffee slowly, not meeting my eyes. There have been others, women who came forward, tried to report him. What happened to them? Dana's silence was answer enough. They're not here anymore, are they? One transferred to a local affiliate in Arizona. One left the industry entirely. One, she paused, her voice dropping. One had a breakdown. She's on disability now. The network painted her as unstable, said she had mental health issues that predated any workplace interactions. My blood ran cold. So he just gets away with it, for years. He's Richard Mercer. He's won 6 Emmys. He's personal friends with the network president. He golfs with advertisers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Dana finally looked at me, her expression a mix of sympathy and warning. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's reality. You have to decide what you're willing to lose. What if I went to HR, made an official complaint? Dana laughed bitterly. HR works for the network, not for you. Anything you tell them goes straight to legal, and legal's job is to protect the company, which means protecting Richard. So there's nothing I can do. I didn't say that. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. I'm saying whatever you decide to do, go in with your eyes open. Know the cost. And document everything, every comment, every incident, every time you reported it and to whom. If you're going to fight this, you need a paper trail they can't dismiss. I started documenting that very night. I bought a notebook, old-fashioned, handwritten, harder to hack or delete than digital files, and I recorded everything. Dates, times, exact quotes, witnesses if there were any. I noted my own emotional state, the impact on my work, the steps I was taking to avoid him. I also started keeping copies of my work, every segment I produced, every email praising my performance, every metric showing my value to the network. I knew that when I came forward, they would try to make this about my competence rather than his behavior. I needed to prove I was excellent at my job. For 2 more months, I endured while I built my case. The harassment continued, sometimes subtle, sometimes blatant. Once, he blocked the doorway of an edit bay and wouldn't move until I agreed to have dinner with him. I declined, trying to keep my voice steady, and he finally stepped aside with a smile that promised consequences. "Your loss, Vanessa, but you're running out of chances." That night I wrote in my notebook, October 17th, blocked exit from Edit Bay 3, demanded dinner, physical intimidation, implied threat to career. 2 weeks later, I was ready. I made an appointment with Human Resources, officially, to discuss workplace concerns. The HR director was a woman named Patricia Langley, mid-50s, with a reputation for professionalism and discretion. I hoped that meant she would take me seriously. I was wrong. I sat in her office for an hour, walking through my documentation, showing her the notebook, explaining the pattern of behavior. I was calm, professional, precise, everything you're supposed to be when reporting harassment. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she closed my notebook and slid it back across the desk. "Vanessa, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. These are serious allegations." "They're not allegations, they happened. I have documentation." "You have your account of events. Without corroboration, without witnesses, it becomes very difficult to take action against someone of Mr. Mercer's standing. There are other women, other victims. I've heard the stories." "Stories aren't evidence." Her voice hardened slightly. "And I have to be honest with you. Filing a formal complaint against Richard Mercer will trigger an investigation. During that investigation, your conduct will also be scrutinized. Every performance review, every interaction, every potential issue in your history will be examined." My performance reviews are excellent. I have nothing to hide. "Everyone has something that can be reframed, Vanessa. Everyone." She leaned forward. "I'm not trying to discourage you from pursuing this, but I need you to understand what you're walking into. Richard Mercer has been with this network for 30 years. He has friends at every level of this organization, including levels above me." The message was clear, even if the words were careful. I was about to go to war with someone who had already won this battle many times before. "I want to file a formal complaint," I said quietly. "Please give me the paperwork." Patricia's expression flickered, something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "Very well, I'll have it sent to your desk by end of day." The retaliation began within 48 hours. I don't know how Richard found out about my complaint. HR was supposed to be confidential, but in a building full of journalists, secrets had a way of traveling through walls. What I do know is that by the end of that week, everything about my job had changed. My assignments dried up. Projects I'd been leading for months were suddenly reassigned to other producers with vague explanations about restructuring priorities. Meetings I'd always attended were now scheduled without me. When I asked my direct supervisor about it, she avoided my eyes and mumbled something about shifting resources. Then the whispers started. I'd walk into the break room and conversations would stop. Colleagues who'd laughed with me for months now barely nodded in my direction. I overheard fragments in hallways, trouble, attention-seeking, difficult, and I knew exactly where those words were coming from. Richard had launched a counter-campaign. I just couldn't prove it. The formal investigation was a joke from the beginning. They assigned it to an outside law firm, technically independent, but retained by the network, paid by the network, beholden to the network's interests. A young associate named Bradley Whitmore interviewed me for 3 hours, his questions probing not Richard's behavior but my perceptions and interpretations. Isn't it possible you misread Mr. Mercer's intentions? Some people describe him as warm and mentoring. Perhaps his manner was misinterpreted. He told me my blouse would look better on his office floor. How do you misinterpret that? Bradley's pen paused. Did anyone else hear this comment? We were alone. He made sure we were always alone. So there are no witnesses to any of the incidents you've described. That's how predators operate. They're not stupid. Bradley wrote something in his notepad, his expression carefully neutral. We'll be interviewing other employees about the general work environment. Is there anyone specific you'd like us to speak with? I gave him Dana's name. I gave him the names of the women who'd left, the ones who'd tried to fight before me. I gave him everything I had. 2 weeks later, I received the investigation's findings. Inconclusive, insufficient evidence to substantiate claims of harassment, no further action warranted. Richard Mercer walked out of the HR director's office that afternoon wearing a smile I could see from across the newsroom. That's when I knew the real destruction was about to begin. They didn't fire me immediately. That would have been too obvious, too easily connected to my complaint. Instead, they followed a careful, calculated playbook designed to make me look like the problem. My performance reviews, which had been exceeds expectations for 3 consecutive years, suddenly shifted to needs improvement. Issues that had never been raised before, minor things, nitpicks, subjective criticisms, appeared in my file like they'd always been there. Your communication style has been described as abrasive, my supervisor told me in a meeting that felt rehearsed. Several colleagues have expressed discomfort working with you. Which colleagues? I'm not at liberty to say. What specific incidents are you referring to? It's more of a general pattern, a perception issue. Perception, the word they used to destroy what they couldn't disprove. I was placed on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, the corporate death sentence. 60 days to address concerns that were vague enough to be impossible to refute. I knew what was coming. Everyone who'd ever been pipped knew what was coming. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I contacted a lawyer, a woman named Adrienne Foster who specialized in employment discrimination. I'd found her through a support group for harassment survivors, and her reputation was fierce. She didn't take many cases, but the ones she took, she won. We met at her office in Midtown, a modest space that belied her formidable track record. She listened to my story without interrupting, reviewed my documentation with meticulous attention, and asked questions that showed she understood exactly what I was facing. They're building a termination case, she said when I finished. Everything they're doing now is designed to create a paper trail that justifies letting you go for cause. That way, they can claim the firing had nothing to do with your complaint. Can they do that? It's so obviously retaliation. Obviously to you and me, but in court, obvious isn't enough. You need to prove causation, that the adverse actions were directly connected to your protected activity. She tapped my notebook. This is good. This is exactly what we need, but we need more. More documentation. More voices. You said there were other women, other victims. If we can find them, get them to corroborate the pattern of behavior, it changes the entire case. One woman is easy to dismiss. Multiple women are impossible to ignore. I thought about Dana's warnings, the women who'd disappeared, the one who'd had a breakdown. They're scared, Adrienne. They've seen what happens to people who speak up. Then we need to show them what happens when people don't. She leaned forward. Vanessa, I'm going to be honest with you. This fight is going to get ugly. They have more money, more lawyers, more connections. They will try to destroy your reputation, your credibility, your career. They will make you the villain of this story. I'm already the villain. I've already lost my career. Not yet, but you're about to. Her eyes were fierce. The question is, are you willing to lose everything to expose the truth? Because that's what it might take. I thought about Maya, about the future I was supposed to provide for her, about the career I'd spent 15 years building. Then I thought about the other women, the ones who'd been silenced before me, the ones who would come after. I'm willing, I said, whatever it takes. The termination came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 53 days into my performance improvement plan. They didn't even wait for the full 60 days. They called me into HR, handed me a folder full of fabricated concerns and manufactured shortcomings, and told me my employment was being separated effective immediately. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors," Patricia Langley said, her face a mask of professional detachment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and tell her exactly what I thought of her confidential HR process and her independent investigation. But Adrian had prepared me for this moment. "I'll need copies of everything in my personnel file," I said calmly. "And I want it noted that I am disputing this termination as unlawful retaliation for my harassment complaint." Patricia's expression flickered, just for a moment, before returning to neutral. "That will be noted. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." They walked me out like a criminal, past the newsroom where I'd produced hundreds of segments, past colleagues who wouldn't meet my eyes, past Richard Mercer's office, where I could see him watching through the glass with that satisfied smile. I didn't give him the satisfaction of looking away. "I see you," I said quietly, echoing words I didn't know would become my battle cry. "And I'm not done." The first week after my termination, I didn't get out of bed. I told myself I was strategizing, processing, preparing for the fight ahead. But the truth was simpler and more humiliating. I was broken. Everything I'd built over 15 years, my reputation, my career, my identity as a professional, had been stripped away in a single Friday afternoon meeting. Maya tried to take care of me. My 13-year-old daughter, who should have been worrying about homework and friends and whether some boy in her class noticed her, was instead bringing me cups of tea I didn't drink and plates of food I couldn't eat. "Mom, you're scaring me," she said on day 5, sitting on the edge of my bed. "Please talk to me." I looked at her, this beautiful, fierce girl I'd raised by myself since her father left when she was 3, and I felt shame wash over me. I was supposed to be her example. I was supposed to show her how to be strong. "I'm sorry, baby," I said, pulling myself upright. "I'm so sorry I've been—" "Fighting monsters," she interrupted. "I know, you told me the truth, remember, about what happened at your job." I had told her, a simplified version, age-appropriate but honest. She deserved to know why her mother had suddenly stopped going to work. "The monsters won, Maya. They took everything." "No, they didn't." Her voice was fierce. "They took your job, they didn't take you, they didn't take us, and they didn't take your voice." My voice, the thing they'd tried hardest to silence. I pulled my daughter into a hug and let myself cry, really cry, for the first time since the termination. When the tears finally stopped, something had shifted. The fog of despair was lifting, replaced by something harder and clearer. They wanted me silent. They expected me broken. I would give them neither. Adrian had given me homework during those dark days, even when I wasn't answering her calls. "Find the other women," she'd said. "The ones who came before you, the ones Richard silenced. If we can get even 2 or 3 of them to join the lawsuit, it changes everything." It sounded simple. It was anything but. The woman in Arizona, Sarah Chen, who transferred to a tiny affiliate in Tucson, hung up on me 3 times before agreeing to a conversation. "I can't do this again," she said, her voice trembling. "I have a new life now, a new job. I've finally stopped having nightmares." "I understand. I do. But Sarah, he's still there. He's still doing this to other women, and he's going to keep doing it until someone stops him." "Then let someone else stop him. I already tried. I lost everything." "So did I, but what if this time is different? What if there are enough of us that they can't dismiss us all?" A long silence. Then, "How many do you have?" "You'd be the first, but I'm going to find more." Another silence, even longer. "Call me back when you have more. I'll think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a final no. Finding the other women was like excavating a crime scene that everyone wanted to stay buried. I spent hours in coffee shops with my laptop, searching LinkedIn for former WNS employees, cross-referencing names with news articles and social media posts. I tracked down email addresses, phone numbers, sometimes even home addresses when all other avenues failed. Most didn't respond. The ones who did were guarded, suspicious, afraid. "How do I know you're not working for them?" one woman asked. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "You don't," I admitted. "All I can tell you is my story and let you decide for yourself." I told her. I told all of them. The harassment, the complaint, the retaliation, the termination. I showed them my documentation. I gave them Adrian's contact information. And slowly, painfully, doors began to open. Meredith Collins had worked at WNS in the early 2000s. She'd left the industry entirely after Richard's harassment became unbearable. She was a high school English teacher now, living in Connecticut, trying to forget she'd ever wanted to be a journalist. "He told me I was special," she said, her voice hollow. "That he could make me a star. I was 24 years old. I believed him." Jessica Thornton had been Richard's assistant for 2 years in the mid-2010s. The proximity made her an easy target. She'd filed a complaint, the only other formal complaint in Richard's file, and had been transferred to the network's corporate archives, a career dead end where she'd withered until she finally quit. "They called it a lateral move," she said bitterly. "A new opportunity." Everyone knew what it really was: punishment. Corinne Reeves had been a rising anchor, groomed for bigger things, until she rejected Richard's advances. Her career had stalled mysteriously. Promised promotions never materialized. Eventually, she'd left for a smaller network where she still worked, never quite reaching the potential everyone had once seen in her. 4 women, 4 stories, 4 careers damaged or destroyed by the same man, protected by the same institution. It still wasn't enough. "We need a pattern that's undeniable," Adrian explained during one of our strategy sessions. "4 women is good, more is better. But what we really need is something that shows the company knew, that HR had repeated warnings and chose to ignore them." They covered their tracks. The investigation was designed to find nothing. Then we go around them. Freedom of information requests, subpoenas during discovery, former HR employees who might be willing to talk. She paused. "There's also another option." "What?" "The press." I felt my stomach drop. Going public. Not with allegations, not yet, but telling your story, putting a human face on what happened, creating pressure that makes the network's silence untenable. "They'll destroy me. Richard has friends at every outlet in the industry." "He has friends, but he also has enemies. Men like Richard always have enemies, people he stepped on, people he humiliated, people who are waiting for the chance to see him fall." Adrian leaned forward. "The media landscape is changing, Vanessa. Me Too happened. Harvey Weinstein fell. The conversation has shifted. What was unspeakable 5 years ago is now front-page news." I thought about it for a long moment. Going public meant losing any chance of a quiet settlement. It meant putting my face, my name, my story into a world that might tear me apart. But it also meant controlling the narrative, telling my story before they could twist it, using my voice, the one they'd tried so hard to silence, to speak directly to the public. "How would it work?" I asked. Adrian smiled. "I know a journalist, an independent one, not connected to any network. She's been investigating Richard Mercer for months. She has sources inside WNS. All she needs is someone willing to go on the record." "And if I go on the record?" "Then the story stops being about one disgruntled employee. It becomes about a system that protected a predator for 30 years. Her eyes met mine. "It becomes about change." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to decide. "Set up the meeting," I said. "It's time to stop being silent." The journalist's name was Amani Williams. She wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined someone slick and polished, the kind of television-ready personality I'd worked with my entire career. Instead, Imani was unassuming, early 40s, natural hair pulled back in a simple twist, wearing jeans and a blazer that suggested she'd dressed up for this meeting, but wasn't entirely comfortable doing so. She worked for the National Tribune, an independent investigative outlet that had broken several major stories in recent years. She had no ties to WNS, no advertising relationships to protect, no corporate owners who golfed with network executives. We met at a diner in Queens, far from Manhattan, far from anyone who might recognize us. "I've been investigating Richard Mercer for 8 months, Imani said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I have sources inside the network, people who have seen things, heard things, but are too scared to go on record. I have internal documents that suggest HR has received multiple complaints over the years. What I don't have is a face, a voice, someone willing to tell their story publicly." "And you think I'm that person?" "I think you might be. Adrienne speaks highly of you. She says you're tough." Imani studied me with eyes that missed nothing. "But I need to be honest with you, Vanessa. If you do this, they will come for you. They will dig up every mistake you've ever made, every enemy you've ever created, every moment of weakness or imperfection. They will paint you as a liar, a gold digger, a woman scorned. Are you ready for that?" I thought about Richard's smile, about the women whose careers he'd destroyed, about my daughter watching me choose between safety and truth. "I'm ready." "Then tell me everything, from the beginning." I talked for 4 hours. I told Imani about my first day at WNS, full of hope and ambition. I told her about the comments, the touches, the escalating harassment. I told her about reporting to HR and watching my complaint disappear into a system designed to protect predators. I told her about the retaliation, the fabricated performance issues, the termination that ended my career. I showed her my notebook, the one Dana had told me to keep, the documentation of every incident, every date, every word. I gave her copies of my performance reviews, the ones that proved I'd been excellent at my job until I became inconvenient. And I told her about the other women, Sarah, Meredith, Jessica, Corinne, the pattern that stretched back decades. When I finished, Imani sat in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "This is worse than I thought," she finally said. "I knew Richard was a problem. I didn't know the institutional cover-up went this deep." "Can you prove it, the cover-up?" "I think so, with what you've given me combined with what I already have." She nodded slowly. "I need to make some calls, verify details, but Vanessa, if even half of what you've told me checks out, this is front-page news, not just for us but for every major outlet in the country." "How long until publication?" "A few weeks, maybe. I need to give WNS a chance to respond. That's journalism ethics. They'll deny everything, of course, but the denial is part of the story." A few weeks. A few weeks until my life changed forever, until the world knew my name and my shame and my fight. "What happens after?" I asked quietly. "After it publishes?" Imani looked at me with something like compassion. "Honestly, I don't know. These stories can go viral or vanish without a trace. It depends on timing, on mood, on 100 factors no one can predict." She reached across the table and gripped my hand. "But I can tell you this. Telling the truth matters. Even if no one listens, though I think they will, telling the truth matters. It's how you take back what they stole from you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Go home," Imani said gently. "Hug your daughter, rest. The hard part is about to begin." The story broke 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in October. "Network stars DECADES of harassment. Inside WNS culture of silence," read the headline. Beneath it was a photograph of Richard Mercer accepting one of his Emmy Awards, grinning at the camera with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. And beneath that was my name, my story, my face. Imani had done extraordinary work. She'd verified everything I'd told her and uncovered even more. Internal memos showing that HR had received complaints about Richard as far back as 1998, settlements that had been paid and sealed, a pattern of women who'd been quietly transferred or terminated after raising concerns. 4 women were quoted on the record: me, Sarah, Meredith, and Karen. Jessica had agreed at the last minute, her courage bolstered by seeing she wasn't alone. Others were quoted anonymously, sources inside the network who confirmed the culture of fear and complicity. I watched my phone light up with notifications as the story spread. First local news, then national. Twitter erupted. Other outlets picked up the story, running their own segments, interviewing their own experts on workplace harassment and institutional failure. By noon, my name was trending. By evening, 3 more women had contacted Imani, wanting to tell their stories. By the next morning, advertisers were pulling their accounts from WNS morning programming. The network's response was swift and predictable. They issued a statement expressing concern about the allegations while vigorously defending Richard Mercer's exemplary record. They announced an internal investigation, another one, this time conducted by a different outside firm, as if changing the lawyers would change the outcome. Richard himself released a statement through his attorney. I categorically deny these false allegations. Throughout my 30-year career, I have been a mentor and advocate for women in journalism. These accusations are a coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees seeking financial gain. I look forward to being fully vindicated. The statement was almost word for word what Adrian had predicted. They were following the playbook. Deny, attack the accuser's credibility, claim victimhood. But something was different this time. The public wasn't buying it. Social media erupted with support, not just for me, but for all the women who'd been silenced. #BelieveVanessa started trending. Other journalists began investigating their own networks, uncovering similar patterns at other organizations. It was like we'd cracked open a dam, and decades of suppressed stories were flooding out. I sat in my apartment, watching the coverage on a television I'd muted, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Then the attacks began. Anonymous sources started feeding stories to sympathetic outlets, stories about my erratic behavior at WNS, my difficult personality, my history of conflict with colleagues. A gossip blog ran a piece suggesting I was having financial troubles and had fabricated allegations for a payday. Another outlet dug up an ex-boyfriend from 20 years ago who claimed I had a temper and was prone to exaggeration. The message was clear: this woman cannot be trusted. I knew it was coming. Adrian had warned me. Imani had warned me, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. My daughter found me crying at the kitchen table, laptop open to yet another article questioning my credibility. Don't read those, Mom, Maya said, closing the laptop firmly. Those are lies. Everyone who knows you knows they're lies. Not everyone knows me, baby. Most people only know what they read. Then write something new. Tell them who you really are. I looked at my 13-year-old daughter, this wise, fierce girl who somehow believed in me even when I was struggling to believe in myself, and I felt something click into place. She was right. I'd spent my whole career helping other people tell their stories. Maybe it was time to tell my own. I started with a video recorded on my phone. No production value, no script, no professional lighting or makeup or teleprompter. Just me, sitting at my kitchen table, speaking directly into the camera. My name is Vanessa Carter. You've probably read things about me over the past few days, some true, some lies. I want you to hear my story from me. Not filtered through press releases or anonymous sources. Just me, telling you what actually happened. I talked for 23 minutes. I told them everything: the harassment, the complaint, the retaliation, the termination. I talked about the other women who'd been silenced before me. I talked about the system that protected predators while punishing victims. And I talked about why I was still fighting. They want me to be quiet. They want me to be ashamed. They want me to disappear so everyone can go back to pretending this isn't happening. I looked directly into the camera. I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to keep talking until something changes. And if you're watching this, if you've experienced something similar, I want you to know you're not alone. Your voice matters, and I will fight for you the way I'm fighting for myself. I posted the video on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I had no following, no platform, no reason to believe anyone would watch. Within 24 hours, it had 3 million views. The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in, thousands upon thousands of women sharing their own stories. Harassment at work, at school, in their communities. Complaints that were ignored. Careers that were destroyed. Silence that had been enforced through fear and shame for years, sometimes decades. You're saying what I was too scared to say. I thought I was alone. I thought no one would believe me. Thank you for being brave. You're giving the rest of us courage. I read every comment, every single one, even the hateful ones, the ones calling me a liar, a gold digger, a destroyer of good men's reputations. I read those too because I needed to understand what I was fighting against. But the supportive messages outnumbered the attacks 100 to 1. And with each message, I felt something building, not just momentum, but community. A network of women who'd been isolated by their experiences, finally finding each other. Maya watched me read the comments one evening, her expression thoughtful. You should do more videos, she said. Like a regular show, people need to hear you. I'm not a broadcaster anymore, baby. I don't have a studio or equipment or... You have a phone, you have a story, you have people who want to listen. She shrugged with teenage certainty. What else do you need? She was right. What else did I need? I launched the podcast 2 weeks later. Unsilenced, stories they don't want you to hear. The production was bare bones, just me, a decent microphone I bought with my dwindling savings, and a quiet corner of my apartment. But the content was real, raw, unfiltered. Each episode featured a different story. Sometimes I interviewed women who'd experienced harassment. Sometimes I talked to lawyers, activists, and advocates working to change the system. Sometimes I simply spoke directly to my growing audience, sharing updates on my own case and reflecting on what I was learning. The audience grew faster than I could have imagined. 10,000 downloads in the first week, 50,000 by the end of the first month. By month 3, I was averaging 200,000 downloads per episode and had been featured in the New York Times, NPR, and a dozen other outlets as a voice of the growing movement against workplace harassment. Advertisers started reaching out, ethical brands that wanted to align themselves with the message. I was careful, selective, refusing anyone whose values didn't match my own. But the revenue allowed me to upgrade my equipment, hire a part-time producer, and dedicate myself full-time to this unexpected new career. I had become what they feared most, a voice they couldn't silence. Meanwhile, the legal case was advancing. Adrian had built something powerful, with 12 women now willing to testify, some on record, some confidentially. We had a pattern of behavior that was impossible to dismiss. Internal documents obtained through discovery showed that HR had received complaints about Richard Mercer 7 times over 23 years. Each complaint had been investigated and dismissed. Each complainant had eventually left the network. This is institutional complicity, Adrian explained during a strategy session. They didn't just fail to stop him, they actively protected him. That makes the network liable, not just Richard. The lawsuit named WNS, Richard Mercer, Patricia Langley, the HR director who dismissed my complaint, and several other executives who'd been involved in the cover-up. We were seeking damages for wrongful termination, retaliation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil conspiracy. The numbers were substantial, but money was never the point. I want policy changes, I told Adrian. I want mandatory training, independent reporting channels, consequences for cover-ups. I want to make it impossible for them to do this again. That's going to be harder to get than money. I don't care, that's what I want. She smiled, a rare expression that transformed her usually serious face. You know, most clients just want a settlement. You want a revolution. I want what should have existed all along. I don't think that's revolutionary. I think it's basic human decency. The network was feeling the pressure. Advertisers were pulling out at an accelerating rate, not just from Richard's programs, but from the entire morning block. Ratings were slipping as viewers associated WNS with the scandal. The stock price had dropped 8% since the story broke, costing shareholders hundreds of millions of dollars. 3 more women had come forward publicly, bringing the total to 15. Each story added another layer to the pattern, another nail in the coffin of Richard's exemplary record. And then the internal emails leaked. Someone inside WNS, I never learned who, sent a cache of internal communications to a Manny Williams. Hundreds of emails spanning years, showing executives discussing how to manage complaints about Richard, how to protect the asset, how to ensure that problem employees were transitioned out quietly. One email, from the network president himself, was particularly damning. Richard is too valuable to lose over he said she said nonsense. Make this go away, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. The words that had destroyed careers, silenced victims, and enabled a predator for 30 years. When Imani published the emails, the firestorm became an inferno. The network president resigned first, then 2 senior VPs, then the head of HR, Patricia Langley, who dismissed my complaint as unsubstantiated. Richard Mercer held on longer than the others, issuing defiant statements through his lawyers, threatening to sue anyone who defamed him. But even he couldn't survive what came next. A former intern came forward, a 22-year-old woman who'd worked at WNS just 6 months earlier. Her story was recent, detailed, and corroborated by text messages Richard had sent her. Explicit messages, threatening messages, messages that proved beyond any doubt that he was exactly what we'd said he was. Richard Mercer was terminated 3 days later. After 30 years, 6 Emmys, and countless victims, he was finally, definitively done. I was at home when I heard the news, watching the announcement on the same network that had once employed us both. "Mom," Maya appeared in the doorway. "Are you okay?" I realized I was crying, tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking. "I'm okay, baby. I'm more than okay." "You won." I looked at my daughter, this fierce, brave girl who'd held me together through the worst of it, and I shook my head. We won, all of us. Every woman who spoke up, every person who believed us, everyone who refused to stay silent. I pulled her into a hug. This isn't just my victory. It belongs to everyone they ever tried to silence. The settlement came 6 months later. I can't disclose the exact amount. That was part of the agreement. But I can tell you it was substantial. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to secure Maya's future, to fund the work I was building, to never again be vulnerable in the way I'd been when they took my job. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered were the policy changes. As a condition of settlement, WNS agreed to implement comprehensive reforms, independent reporting channels for harassment complaints, mandatory training for all employees, third-party oversight of investigations, and a commitment to zero tolerance that would be enforced, not just proclaimed. They also agreed to establish a fund for former employees who'd been harmed by the previous system, a recognition, however inadequate, that I wasn't the only victim, that the culture they'd allowed to fester had damaged countless careers and lives. "This is unprecedented," Adrian told me when the final documents were signed. "I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've never seen a corporation agree to reforms this extensive." They didn't agree because they wanted to. They agreed because they had no choice. "Exactly, you left them no choice. You and every woman who spoke up." She shook her head slowly. "You changed an industry, Vanessa. Do you understand that? The ripple effects of this case are going to be felt for decades." I understood, but I also knew the work wasn't finished. One network reformed didn't mean the problem was solved. For every Richard Mercer who was exposed, there were dozens more still operating in shadows, protected by the same systems of silence and complicity. I wasn't done fighting. I was just getting started. The podcast grew beyond anything I'd imagined. What had started as a desperate attempt to tell my own story had become a movement, a platform reaching millions of people every week, giving voice to stories that had been suppressed for too long. I expanded the format, bringing in expert guests to discuss not just individual cases, but systemic solutions. Lawyers who specialized in employment law, activists working on legislative reform, psychologists who helped survivors understand the trauma they'd experienced, executives who were genuinely trying to build better workplaces. The audience grew with each episode. 200,000 became 500,000. 500,000 became 1,000,000. By the end of the second year, Unsilenced was one of the top podcasts in the country, downloaded over 15 million times weekly. Media companies started reaching out. The same networks that had blacklisted me were now offering production deals, television adaptations, partnership opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on me. They want to profit from the movement they tried to suppress, Maya observed one evening, flipping through a stack of offer letters on our kitchen table. Isn't that kind of gross? It is, but it's also an opportunity. I sat down beside her. The question is whether we can use their resources without being controlled by them, whether we can stay true to the mission while reaching an even bigger audience. Can we? I don't know, but I think we have to try. The television show launched in our third year. Unsilenced, the series aired on a streaming platform, not a traditional network, which allowed us more creative control. Each episode featured a different story of someone who'd been silenced and fought back. Not just workplace harassment, but all forms of suppression. Whistleblowers who'd exposed corporate wrongdoing, activists who'd challenged unjust systems, ordinary people who'd refused to stay quiet in the face of injustice. I hosted and produced, bringing the skills I'd developed over 15 years in television to a purpose I actually believed in. The production values were higher now, professional studios, experienced crews, real budgets, but the heart remained the same. Real stories, real voices, real change. The show was nominated for an Emmy in its first season. The irony of potentially winning an award in the same category Richard Mercer had dominated for years wasn't lost on anyone. When I walked the red carpet, reporters asked how it felt to be on the other side of the industry that had once expelled me. It feels like justice, I said, but not just for me, for everyone who was told their story didn't matter, for everyone who was silenced and is finally being heard. We won that night. When I walked to the stage to accept the award, I thought about all the people who'd helped me get there. Adrian, Imani, Dana, the other women who'd come forward, Maya who'd never stopped believing in me. And I thought about Richard Mercer, watching from wherever he was now, seeing the woman he'd tried to destroy accepting an Emmy for telling the truth about him. This award belongs to every person who's ever been told to stay quiet, I said, holding the statue up to the lights. To every woman who filed a complaint that was ignored, to every survivor who was blamed for their own abuse, to everyone who was silenced and is finding their voice. I looked directly into the camera. Keep speaking, keep fighting. They can try to silence us, but they will never succeed. Not anymore. The audience rose to their feet. The applause seemed to go on forever. Congress came calling in year 4. A Senate subcommittee was investigating workplace harassment across industries, and they wanted me to testify, to share not just my personal experience, but the systemic patterns I'd uncovered through years of advocacy work. I prepared for weeks, working with policy experts to develop specific recommendations. This wasn't just about telling my story anymore. It was about changing the laws that allowed predators to thrive and institutions to protect them. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the walls. Senators sat in elevated rows, looking down at the witness table where I sat alone with a microphone and a stack of documents. And in the gallery, watching with expressions I couldn't quite read, were several executives from WNS, including the new network president, who'd been brought in to clean up the mess his predecessor had made. Ms. Carter, thank you for being here today, the committee chair began. Please share your testimony. I spoke for 45 minutes without notes. I told my story, the same story I'd told so many times, but with new details for this audience, new context for this purpose. I explained how the current system protected predators and punished victims. I outlined specific policy reforms that would shift the balance. And I named names. Not just Richard Mercer, but the executives who'd enabled him, the HR professionals who'd dismissed complaints, the lawyers who'd specialized in silencing victims. I laid out the entire ecosystem of complicity that had allowed one man to harm so many for so long. When I finished, there was silence. Then Senator Patricia Williams, a black woman who'd fought her own battles against establishment power, leaned into her microphone. Ms. Carter, what would you say to a young woman today who's experiencing what you experienced? A woman who's being harassed and doesn't know if she should speak up. I thought about Maya, about the 13-year-old girl who'd sat on my bed and told me the monsters hadn't taken my voice. I would tell her that speaking up is the hardest thing she'll ever do, I said slowly. That there will be people who don't believe her, who blame her, who try to destroy her for telling the truth. I paused, feeling the weight of every woman watching. And then I would tell her to do it anyway, because silence never protected anyone, because the people who harm us count on our silence, because every voice that rises makes it easier for the next voice and the next, until the chorus is too loud to ignore. I looked around the room, at the senators, the cameras, the executives in the gallery. They tried to silence me. They failed. And they will keep failing because there are millions of us now, and we will not be quiet anymore. 7 years have passed since they escorted me out of WNS with a security guard at my elbow. I'm writing this from the offices of the Unsilenced Foundation, a 3-story building in downtown Manhattan that houses our podcast studios, our legal advocacy center, our survivor support programs, and the team of 53 people who work every day to amplify voices that powerful people would rather suppress. The foundation has helped over 4,000 survivors navigate the aftermath of harassment and retaliation. We've provided legal support for hundreds of cases, funded investigations that exposed predators at major corporations, and advocated for legislative reforms that are now law in 12 states. The podcast reaches 22 million listeners weekly across 6 platforms and 14 languages. The television show is in its 5th season. The book I wrote, Unsilenced, A Survivor's Guide to Finding Your Voice, has been translated into 23 languages and is required reading in journalism programs across the country. The girl they tried to silence has become a voice for millions. But the numbers, impressive as they are, don't capture what matters most. What matters is the woman in Ohio who heard my story and finally reported her boss after 17 years of abuse. She sent me a letter describing the moment she walked into HR, hands shaking, voice trembling, my podcast episode playing in her earbuds for courage. I kept hearing your voice saying, "They count on our silence," she wrote, and I decided they couldn't count on mine anymore. What matters is the college student in California who used our legal resources to challenge a professor who'd been preying on undergraduates for decades. Her case led to his termination and a complete overhaul of the university's reporting system. What matters is the young journalist who told me at a conference that she'd entered the profession specifically because of what I'd done. "You showed me that speaking truth to power was possible," she said. "You showed me what journalism could be." These are the ripples I couldn't have imagined when I was crying on my bathroom floor, wondering if I'd ever work again. Each voice that rises because mine rose first. Each silence broken because I broke mine. Each life changed because I refused to disappear. That's legacy. Not awards or money or fame, but the multiplication of courage across time and distance. My mother passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. At her funeral, I spoke about the gift she'd given me, the belief that words were the most powerful force in the universe, the conviction that stories could change reality if they were told with enough truth and enough courage. She used to say I had a voice, I told the congregation. She didn't know what that voice would cost me, but she also didn't know what it would build. I think she would be proud, not of the fame or the success, but of the fight, of refusing to be quiet when quiet was easier, of using the gift she saw in me to make the world a little more just. My father, 83 now and still stubborn as ever, squeezed my hand from the front pew. "Your mama always knew," he said afterward. "From the time you were small, she knew you'd shake something loose in this world. She just didn't know how hard they'd try to stop you." "They didn't stop me, Daddy." "No, baby, they surely didn't." Maya graduated from Columbia Law School last spring, specializing in employment discrimination. She works at a nonprofit now, representing survivors who can't afford private attorneys. When I watch her in court, fierce, prepared, absolutely unintimidated by power, I see echoes of the 13-year-old girl who told me the monsters hadn't taken my voice. "You're the reason I do this," she told me after winning her first major case. "Not just because of what happened to you, but because of how you responded. You showed me that one person could change things. That fighting mattered, even when winning seemed impossible. I had helped so many people. You started it. You stood up first. Everything else came after." She's right in a way, but she's also wrong. I wasn't the first. I was part of a long chain of women who'd fought before me, some who'd won, many who'd lost, all who'd contributed to the slow accumulation of change that made my victory possible. I tell Maya about them sometimes, about the women whose names history forgot but whose courage mattered anyway, about the complaints that were dismissed and the lawsuits that were lost and the careers that were sacrificed for no visible gain. They weren't failures. They were foundation stones. They were the reason the ground was ready when I finally stood up. I still think about Richard Mercer sometimes. He was never criminally charged. The statute of limitations had expired on most of his offenses, and prosecutors couldn't build cases on the rest. He lives quietly now, I'm told, in a gated community somewhere in Florida, his reputation destroyed, his legacy rewritten, his name synonymous with the abuse of power he once wielded so casually. I don't know if he feels remorse. I don't know if he's capable of understanding the harm he caused, and honestly, I've stopped caring. For years, I carried him with me, his face, his voice, his smile when he thought he'd won. He was the engine of my anger, the fuel for my fight. But somewhere along the way, I realized I'd outgrown him. The movement I'd helped build was so much larger than one predator and one victim. It was about changing systems, not just punishing individuals. Richard Mercer will die someday, forgotten and diminished. The changes we've made will outlast him by centuries. That's victory. Not revenge, but transcendence. Not destroying him, but building something so much bigger that he becomes irrelevant. Every morning, I wake up in an apartment I own, in a life I've built, and I take a moment to remember. I remember the woman who was escorted out like a criminal, the woman who couldn't get out of bed for a week, the woman who thought her career was over, her voice was silenced, her fight was lost. She's still part of me. She always will be. The wounds don't disappear just because we win. They become part of who we are, scars that remind us what we survived and what we overcame. But she's not alone anymore. She's surrounded by millions of voices that rose because hers rose first. She's part of a chorus that grows louder every day, a movement that can't be silenced because it's too vast, too diverse, too determined. They tried to silence her. They failed. And every voice that rises now is proof that they will keep failing, forever. As I sit here now, in an office that exists because I refuse to be quiet, I sometimes think about the woman who recorded that first video at her kitchen table. She was so scared, so uncertain, so unsure whether anyone would listen or care. I wish I could go back and tell her what I know now. That her voice was never small, it just hadn't found its audience yet. That the people trying to silence her were afraid, not powerful. That every word she spoke would ripple outward in ways she couldn't imagine, reaching millions of people who needed to hear exactly what she had to say. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been told to stay quiet, to stop making trouble, to accept what was done to you and move on, I need you to hear me. Your silence protects only those who harmed you. Your voice, as small as it might feel, has power they will never be able to take. The very thing they're trying to suppress is the thing that can set you free. I know it's terrifying. I know the cost feels impossible. I know you've calculated the risks and decided 1,000 times that speaking up isn't worth it. But I'm standing here as proof that it is. Not because speaking up is easy, not because you'll definitely win, but because silence is its own kind of death, a slow suffocation of who you really are. So I ask you now, what truth have you been carrying? What story have you been afraid to tell? What voice have you been suppressing because someone told you it was too dangerous to use? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. This community was built on shared truth, and your story, your voice, belongs here. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Not for me, but for everyone who needs to find stories like this when they're alone in the dark, wondering if fighting is worth it. It is, I promise you, it is. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's being silenced right now, someone who's afraid to speak. Let them know they're not alone. Until next time, this is Auntie Me reminding you. They can threaten your job. They can blacklist your name. They can try with everything they have to make you disappear. But they can never, ever silence a voice that refuses to be quiet. Stay loud, stay brave, and never stop speaking your truth.